Okay, here we go. Take one. So I thought that doing this would be really like punk rock, like anti. But what happened was I was accidentally slipped into something much more monk. It was an accidental reverence. So here's the premise of the idea. I had been thinking so much about several different things that layered over each other. One of them being the incentives of the internet and the way that if you want to be seen, or if you want feedback, or if you want to be shared and spread across the social fabric of modernity, the algorithm has given us a set of incentives and rules. And as someone who works professionally in marketing and media, I had seen this set of rules and boundaries grow tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, from something that felt close to art to something that felt much more like psychological manipulation. And that even the platforms were starting to give rules, like Instagram. When it updated, it told me that I needed to create a hook that created an open loop in the mind so the viewer had to watch, but I also needed to tell them what the result was in the first 3 seconds. And so that really got me thinking about the difference between art and content, and how in the time I'm living, the internet originally presented me with a bunch of art and really gave my creative soul a boon. But now, all of the artists that I loved and liked have been forced into making something closer to content, following all of these rules to get noticed, and it's losing the art. So numbers-wise, performative-wise, the functionality of the intent of the algorithm, it's doing much better. But what it is much less and not art. So there was that idea. And then I was having this issue with time because of some of my spiritual studies. As a person of faith, I'm always trying to be in the Word and in prayer and studying different things, and time is a big theme in that arena. And I also came across a philosopher, Heidegger, that put forward the idea that time is not minutes, hours, days, weeks, but rather it is meaning and depth. And that really spun my mind around, and I started thinking of concrete examples of what on earth he meant. Also around this time, I was going through a jump rope kick, and I noticed during that I was doing a circuit training. And the 1 minute while I was jumping rope felt like I could have an hour of thought and an eternity of waiting. And then in the minute where I got a break to catch my breath, to get ready for the next minute, it was instantaneous. And so that was just like the most in my face exposition of time being faster and slower. And I think that in theory, we all have a sense of that, of like time flies when you're having fun. It just really got me thinking about time. And that led me down the path of Chronos versus Kairos, which is kind of this idea of measured time as man has created versus spiritual time and the way things happen in meaning. And then as I was having all of those thoughts, push and pull, so then I noticed this also in my usage of the internet, in the way that I could really just burn 30 minutes in the morning, evening, afternoon, midday, any gap of flipping through 50 or 100 tiny snippet vertical videos that could hold my attention and make me keep looking and keep hunting and keep seeking something. And then finally something more important, or the urgency of real life, would get back to me. And those 30 minutes were just gone. And then I thought about how trying to sit and maybe listen to an entire record or an entire album could feel like, oh my goodness, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 30 minutes doing that one thing, ingesting that one piece of media. Like, is that valuable to me? Is that valid? Like, is that a waste of time? Like, so anyways, I could go further on that, but the compression and expansion of time became really exciting. And so all of these things mapped together, I got this idea of making anti-content. I thought, whoa, you know what no one would do, and you know what no one is doing, is completely disobeying the unwritten rules of the internet, but still posting it. So I thought it was going to be so punk rock and poke the algorithm in the eye. I was going to give it no captions, no hashtags, no dialogue, no action, just one shot of me staring into nothingness for, I don't know, I thought maybe 5 minutes, a 5-minute clip of nothing. Like, what would the internet do with that? What would the algorithm do with that? So I started down that path. And serendipitously, I had just gotten a new phone, so I thought, well, I'll just use my phone to film these clips. That way it's like, don't have to worry about production, like low resistance. I'll just get it done. So the first one I recorded, I was in California, and there was this beautiful vista that like looked off into the ocean in this white chair, and I thought, I could handle sitting there for a while. So I set up my phone, and I sat there, and without my phone to compress time, but also not having my phone to reference time, I could slowly feel it operating differently. And I was like really nervous and anxious. I was like, oh, what if someone steals my phone? Oh, what if I get a message? Or, oh, what if phone says this, phone says that? So there was that layer of tension. As I sat there, I relaxed into it, and I started to notice hummingbirds. There were lots of hummingbirds, and I hadn't seen them at all in the days before. This was the last day of the trip, and I'd been at this place for many days. And so as my attention on reality began to sharpen, for the first time in the entirety of my life, I heard a hummingbird. Not its wings. I had kind of heard the buzz whip by before, but I heard the hummingbird tweet. And it was beautiful. And it was a little bit euphoric. Like not the first time, but in a new way of me trying to fight against the compression and expansion of time from rules that are created for, gain, capitalism, my attention, my experience in reality, and my spirit was gifted the tweet of a hummingbird, something that I had never had. And amazingly, in the video, it can't be heard, which got me thinking that, like, sometimes I think that the knowledge, digital knowledge, is giving me a greater depth and greater experience, but that's not necessarily converged into reality. Anyways, getting kind of thinky. I sat again. This time there was a bush blooming in front of my house, purple flowers all over, and I thought, you know what? I could look at that for 10 minutes. So I set a chair down, I sat in front of the bush, and I saw the flowers. And for the first 3 minutes, it was exactly what you'd expect, just like forcefully sitting, looking at the bush. And then I noticed a bee. I thought, I didn't see that bee before, but it didn't make me alarmed because the bee was busy at work. And then I noticed another bee. and then another bee. And then something in my attention and perception did a big shift, and I could see hundreds of bees. Hold for car. These were bees with little teeny tiny wings. You couldn't even hear them moving. But all of a sudden, something that went from a pretty static bush went to a huge, abundant bounty of life. Busy at work. And it was just like the spirit tapped me on the shoulder and said, look at how much stuff you don't see. Look at how much wonder there is to behold. And that just really shook me at the idea of how much I was missing and how much deeper and more acute my senses are than I had known or let them be. And somehow it tied back to the expansion and compression of time and where I put my attention and also the incentives of my art and commercial output. So anyways, then I did another sit. I sat again. This time I thought, what is the most punk thing? Like, so far, these things have been kind of worth looking at. So I went and sat in front of the largest pile of man-made rocks I've ever seen. It's a dam behind a lake. And so I sat there. And as you would expect, at the beginning I saw rocks. But as I let my mind clear and I settled into it, it went from seeing rocks to then I could see like 10 cactuses, and all of a sudden they were bright green. So at the beginning I was only seeing gray, and then I was seeing bright green. And then I noticed if I looked to the left, based on the way the sun was, the rocks were almost white. They were super bright, almost white. And if I looked straight at them, they were like a 50% gray, like checkerboard almost. And if I looked to the right, these rocks were dark, almost black. The shadows were almost black. And then I sat there some more. And then I noticed little bugs. I mean, little tiny bugs that I could see really far away. I could probably see 10 different bugs moving at the same time, which sounds like a superpower, but this isn't something that I had experienced before and wouldn't believed or would have listened with as if hyperbole if told to me, but I was experiencing it. And so I sat there, and all of a sudden this very static, giant pile of rocks was almost animated with life. And I just thought, it just hit me, man, everything is moving, and there is growth and effort and intelligence even in the deadest places. And once again, the compression of time, the expansion of time. And then when I was thinking about all these things, all these different sits, thought, man, I set out on this to be punk, to do exactly the opposite of what the incentives of the internet were promoting. And I did it, but the reaction to it, generally, and my experience of it almost pushed me forward into reverence. I went from like punk to monk. And it was also not lost on me that the device that I was kind of fighting against, the phone as the mining equipment of attention that the algorithm exists through, primarily, one of them. I used it as the surveillance of my stillness. And so by flipping the intention of the device from consumption to stillness and creation, I had gone from what I thought would be punk to be monk. And it was a very exciting conclusion of a lot of these ideas. There is an expansion and compression of time, however you want to think about it. And I am in control of the incentives that I perform for and play to. And that silence, stillness, and reverence is always rewarded, even in the most unassuming ways. That was my experience with sitting still and doing nothing. And I thought I would document it for future reference and to share my experience with you.